President Museveni has now presided over 32 national budgets, usually presented for him by the Minister of Finance. The only other chief executive to rule Uganda for over a decade was Milton Obote, who in his second regime used to present his budget himself. Since 1986, the President Museveni has had 8 ministers of finance who present his budget. New Vision TV now looks at the growth of Museveni's budgets to date. On January 29, 1986, revolutionary leader Yoweri Museveni took the oath of office of President of the Republic of Uganda and soon after announced his first cabinet. The first 12 ministers were all members of the National Resistance Movement, except one DP's economist, Professor Ponciano Mulema, who took the finance docket. Mulema presented Museveni's first budget worth 777 billion old shillings, worth 6 billion after the subsequent currency reform. It was also Mulema's last budget, for things were changing rather fast. The budget implements the economic policies of the government and the NRM's revolutionary policies that even included trading with other countries using barter trade did not take long. What can be pointed out from that budget in light of today's budget is that it relied on domestic borrowing by only 1%. In September 1986, Mulema was replaced by Crispus Chiyonga, an NRM medical doctor. Chiyonga oversaw the accelerated revival of the IMF World Bank-inspired economic reforms that had started during the early 80s but had not been progressing well due to the insecurity and the civil war which was going on. In May 1987, the Uganda currency was reformed, having 2 zeros and 30% struck of all values in cash and deposits, and the cents abolished. The only unit of account henceforth remained the shilling. The new currency, nicknamed the Museveni dollar, then exchanged for 60 shillings to 1 United States dollar. Chiyonga presented the first budget under the new currency regime. The new government's rallying call was on increase of exports as the shilling started deteriorating almost as soon as it was launched due to an unfavorable trade balance. Chiyonga managed 5 budgets up and, including the one of 1991 to 1992, besides the drive towards export diversification, the most radical economic changes took place under his watch. These included the start of privatization that saw the selling off of over 100 state-owned companies that were accused of draining the treasury and, of course, retrenchment of thousands of government workers. In 1992, the finance docket was handed to Joash Mayanja Nkanji, a conservative politician who served as the last caretaker of Buganda before the abolition of kingdoms in 1966. Though local, mostly known as a lawyer, the conservative Nkanji was also an economist. His tenure is remembered as the most rosy in NRM's time. It started off with a liberalization of foreign exchange that made the Uganda shilling fully convertible and its value determined by the market forces. The economy was growing and it seemed there was enough business for everybody. During Nkanji's era, which lasted up to 1998, Emmanuel Tumusiime Mutebile took full charge at Treasury and he took on the macroeconomic stability with unprecedented zeal. A landmark development in 1992 was the merging of the Ministries of Planning and Finance, thus enabling the budget to be unified. Prior to the merger, the Minister of Finance had responsibility for the current budget and the Minister of Planning and Economic Development had responsibility for the capital budget. President Museveni used to describe Nkanji as a former conservative who turned revolutionary. Nkanji's era coincided with the mobile phones revolution and the emergence of private FM radio stations in Uganda. But of greatest significance, it was during this time that Museveni launched the universal primary education that saw primary school enrollment jump from 1.8 million pupils to 6 million immediately and started growing towards 10 million over the years. Education started taking a lion's share in the budget. Mayanja Nkanji was retired in 1998 and replaced by Gerald Sendaula, an accountant and farmer who had served as the Energy and Minister of Finance and Economic Planning. Sendara remained in charge until 2004, and it was during his time that Uganda benefited from the debt forgiveness that saw its foreign external debt almost wiped out from over $5 billion to less than $1 billion. During the Sendara era, Tumusiime left the Treasury, where he had reformed the country's fiscal policy, and moved to the central bank at the helm of the monetary system. From 2005 to 2009, Museveni entrusted the finance docket to an old comrade and fellow ideologue, Dr. Ezra Suruma. The economics professor had also been Deputy Governor, Bank of Uganda, and also the last chairman, Managing Director, Uganda Commercial Bank, before it was privatized. As finance minister, all the budgets Suruma presented were optimistic, drawn in the context of the country's expected oil fortunes after confirmation of commercial quantity reserves. He left office before oil came out of the ground. Mrs. Saida Namirembe Bumba became finance minister in 2009 and left in early 2011 after preparing only 2 budgets. She's not known for any strong credentials, but her late brother Ahmed Seguya was the first commander of the Guerrilla National Resistance Army who died during the struggle. When President Museveni took power, Seguya was given an honorable burial. Saida Bumba will be remembered for a massive supplementary budget passed before the 2011 elections that caused havoc in the economy. Years later, Saida Bumba shocked the nation when she said she had signed an oil production agreement that could have cost the country $157 million without even reading the papers she was signing. In 2011, President Museveni appointed the highly articulate development banker Maria Chiwanuka to head the finance ministry. She managed the national budget until 2015. Her era was preoccupied with restoration of fiscal discipline that had slipped during her predecessor's time. It was also during her era that more loans were contracted from China than ever before, reducing the proportion of the traditional multilateral lender for who she once worked, the World Bank. In 2015, Matia Kasaija took over as finance minister. He had been a minister in the cabinet for several years, and as pragmatic, he had even advocated for the standardization of kickbacks. During his tenure, both the external and internal debts have escalated. The GDP accounts were, however, adjusted, which reduced the debt to GDP ration, allowing for further borrowing. Although the debt contracted during Kasaija's era has been mainly for infrastructure development, the World Bank maintains its return on investment per dollar is less than $1, way below the recommended return of $4 per dollar of investment. The massive domestic borrowing from commercial banks through bonds and treasury bills has also been blamed for crowding out the private sector, as the commercial bankers just buy government stock and make a profit without taking the risk of lending to the private sector. The current 2017-2018 budget was passed amidst protests by some members of the Budget Committee due to the debt portion that surpassed the legal limit. From a budget of 6 billion shillings during his first year, President Museveni is now running a budget of 32 trillion shillings 32 years later, which is 5,200 times more. Even after discounting inflation, it is clear that the growth has indeed been tremendous.